Welcome to another video on film scoring. By this point in the series, we have covered big picture thinking and first impressions for your first time watching a film, how to create a master scene list and music summary to track how both the story and music progress through the project, and even tackled a few things to consider when thinking about which themes will be the most important to the soundtrack. In this video, we're going to continue our process by learning how to spot individual scenes for music. We'll learn how to plan the style, the emotions, and the energy of your music while being mindful of the specific needs of each scene. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment to thank my wonderful patrons for their support of this channel. I wouldn't be able to spend as much time on these videos as I do if it weren't for your support, and I appreciate each and every one of you more than you know. If you'd like to show your support for this channel by becoming a patron, or purchasing a copy of my book, or even making a one-time donation, the links are in the description of this video. So with that, let's get started. So, by this point in the process, you should have a strong idea of what kind of music you'll be writing for the project. The work you put into creating your music summary should, hopefully, include details on which important themes you need to write, and where they'll be used throughout the film. It's at this point where many composers like to take a break from analyzing the movie and actually start to write out some of the basic musical ideas. You don't need to have the final draft of your themes written out yet, but a short sketch or a draft can be helpful. For example, here's a short piano sketch of a theme I wrote. Notice how I've only included the most necessary components of the theme: the melody, the chords, and the bass line. Your sketches don't have to be complicated. Honestly, you could even get away with just the melody if you'd like. The point is to just take some time to figure out the core musical material that you will be using throughout your project. Once you have these sketches, you may find it easier to figure out how to apply them to the specific needs of each point in the story. If you'd like to learn more about specific composing strategies, I recommend checking out my playlists on harmony and melody for composers. But for now, let's start looking at our strategy for spotting scenes. Spotting refers to the process of taking notes on where and how music will be used in a particular scene. This process is typically done in collaboration with both the director and the music editor of a project, but that's not always possible when you're first starting out. So it's important that you have the tools to tackle this step on your own. Start by selecting a scene that you want to spot. You can start with the first scene and move in chronological order, or you could start with the most climactic scene and jump around from there. There's no right or wrong answer for how you get started, so typically, I recommend that you just pick a scene that inspires you and get to work. For this video, we're going to work with the climactic fourth scene of Danny and the Wild Bunch. We'll start by reviewing our notes from the master scene list for this part of the film, and then we'll watch it together to start spotting it for music. Sympty in. First hour, 2 minutes, 37 seconds, 16th frame. Sympty out. First hour, 3 minutes, 48 seconds, 20th frame. In this scene, Miranda wants to maintain control over her story by explaining her decision to Danny. Danny and the Wild Bunch want to take control of themselves by revolting against Miranda. Conflict breaks out when the Wild Bunch attack, and the scene ends when Miranda is knocked unconscious.
Danny? Danny, I know you're upset, but I didn't have a choice.
Oh, we always have a choice. And you reap what you sow. It's time we made some changes of our own.
So when spotting a scene, we want to address two basic concepts: the musical parameters of the scene and the technical parameters of the scene. First, let's look at the technical parameters, starting with contour. Contour is defined as any time the audience is given new information that results in a new emotional experience, a new energy level, and or pondering a new plot circumstance. These shifts in contour are important because these are the moments in the scene where you can make a shift in your music that makes sense. These moments where a shift in contour is matched by a shift in the music are called hit points, or hits for short. In other words, hit points basically break each scene into different segments where the story noticeably shifts. Now, it's super important to make sure you don't get carried away with assigning hit points in your scoring projects. If the music shifts around too frequently, it's going to very quickly become distracting and take away from the story. With that in mind, let's take a quick look at what moments in our scene could warrant a shift in contour. The first big one takes place around SMPTE code 01030622. Prior to this point, we see Miranda trying to find Danny. She sounds almost a little apologetic as she says, "I didn't have a choice." But she's still speaking from a place of authority. She feels that she's still in charge. However, at this point, we see the Wild Bunch start to appear, and it quickly becomes obvious that Miranda is no longer in control. This moment works as a shift in contour because it shifts the emotional experience from one of apprehension of what has happened to Danny to fear about what is about to happen to Miranda. It also results in a change of energy level, which we'll discuss in a bit, as well as pondering a new plot circumstance, as we realize that Miranda is no longer in charge. The next major hit point comes around SMPTE code 01033410. This is the moment where Danny says, "It's time we make some changes of our own." This works because it helps propel the story with new information. This line confirms that the Wild Bunch aren't just attacking Miranda out of rage or out of desire for revenge, but that they have turned on her with a specific goal in mind. In a callback to scene number 2, he reveals that they are done being the pictures and want to take their own crack at being the words. Now, there are many other potential hit points in this scene, such as when the fighting first starts out, or when we first see that Miranda is about to be knocked unconscious. You have a lot of creativity here that you can work with, but once again, I'll say that you should err on the side of caution, and try not to hit too many shifts in contour. Another way to think of this is as using these hit points to break down each scene into its most important segments. Something that you should have no issue with, since we've already tackled a similar concept when creating our master scene list. For example, our hit points break this scene down into 3 basic moments. The opening, when Miranda believes she is still in charge. The middle, when the Wild Bunch decides to rebel against her. And the end, when the Wild Bunch gain the upper hand and reveal what it is they want. Once you've taken note of your hit points, we can use them to inform our next decisions, starting by understanding the sonic needs of the scene. At any given point, one of the composer's many responsibilities is to make sure that any music they write must balance well with the rest of the sonic material of the film, meaning that the music must balance well with any dialogue or important sound effects that are happening in the same scene. Music, dialogue, and sound effects each combine to form the entirety of the sonic element of a film. The tricky part is that only one can be in the foreground at a time. And by foreground, I'm referring to the sound that we want the audience to give the most attention to. As a general rule, dialogue is king. If there are characters speaking, the music and sound effects shouldn't drown them out. If there's no dialogue, then sound effects are next in line for the throne, so long as they can claim one or more of these traits. Are they unexpected or surprising? Do they provide new information to the audience? Or are they associated with the main idea in the plot? If a sound effect can be described as fulfilling any one or more of these three roles, then it can be considered as being important to the story and needing to be in the foreground. For example, if we were to hear a door open off-screen at any point during the fight, we would need to make sure that the music doesn't distract from it, because it would tell us that something is happening off-screen, and could even be important to the plot of the story. If the music isn't mindful of this sound, it could easily be covered up and the audience would completely miss it. Now, if there's no dialogue, and if there are no important sound effects, then and only then does the music take the foreground as the most important sound you want the audience to pay attention to. However, most of the time you're going to need to focus on keeping the music from drawing too much attention to itself. Now, there are a ton of strategies that you can use to accomplish this, but here are a few of the most common ones. So, putting this into practice, let's look at each of the three segments that our hit points have broken the scene into, and ask ourselves, how much dialogue is there? And are there any important sound effects? If we want to get really detailed, we can even mark the exact SMPTE codes of when the music can be in the foreground. But that's optional. For Section 1, when Miranda still thinks she's in charge, we find that there's a decent amount of dialogue, especially near the end. If I were to use a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is no dialogue and 5 is constant dialogue, I'd place this at about a 3. The first half of the section is pretty open, but both Danny and Miranda speak nearly constantly in the second half. In terms of important sound effects, nothing really sticks out as being super important. You could make the case for the sound of Danny's lighter, but since it's sandwiched between dialogue, we can just keep the music in the background for that entire segment. For Section 2, once the Wild Bunch reveals themselves, the dialogue falls out for a bit after Danny says, "You reap what you sow." After that, there's no important sound effects and the music can really just command the foreground. Section 3 opens with Danny saying, "It's time we made some changes of our own." So the music needs to fall back into the background before it can take center stage once more for the rest of the scene. With these notes taken care of, we're ready to start tackling the music-specific parameters of this scene. First things first, let's discuss energy level. Now, energy level refers to the amount of musical and visual activity in the film. Basically, the idea here is that you want to find out how much visual energy a particular scene has, so that you can make an informed decision on how much energy you want your music to have. You can be as specific or general as you'd like for this step. In my last video on spotting, I presented Ben Newhouse's 5 questions approach to energy, where you can answer each of the following questions, and using the proposed scale of 1 to 5, find the average of your answers to determine the general energy level for the scene as a whole. If you're like me and you prefer structure in your approach, then you're more than welcome to use this tool. However, you don't have to. Another perfectly valid approach is to just simply take note of how much energy you feel the scene has compared to the previous scene. Is it similar, lower, or higher energy? Regardless, make sure to apply your approach to each segment that our scene has been broken into. For our example, Section 1 was fairly low energy. It consisted of Miranda cautiously looking for Danny. Section 2 is a much higher energy, with the Wild Bunch attacking. Then, Section 3 maintains a similar level of high energy. Once you've mapped out the energy of the scene, we can start to take a look at the emotions involved. Now, here we can once again get as detailed as we like. However, to keep this video from getting too long, I'm going to recommend that you check out my video on translating emotions into music if you want a more comprehensive and detailed approach. For now, we're going to just simply try and answer 2 questions. Which important emotions are available in the scene? And how should the audience's emotional experience evolve as the scene continues? Once again, let's make sure to look at each of our sections of this scene for this step. Section 1 is a bit apprehensive. We don't know what happened to Danny yet, or what Miranda is about to find. Section 2 rewards that apprehension with full-on horror as the Wild Bunch turn on their creator. Section 3 continues that horror setting before ending with a blackout. So, all in all, this scene should see the audience's emotions develop from apprehensive curiosity to horror. Next, we can consider the style of our music. In other words, we want to consider what the music needs to accomplish in each section, and what kind of compositional structure would work best. We should have already answered that first question by now when we created our music summary. For this scene, I want the music to both enhance the emotional experience of the audience and underline the power struggle between the characters. We can come back to that later, but for now, let's just focus on what compositional structure will work best for this scene. Now, when I say compositional structure, I mean how many layers will work for the music. There are many different layers that you can add to your music, and the ones you choose will largely be dependent on your own compositional style, so there aren't any inherently right or wrong answers here. However, we've been spending a lot of time taking notes on this scene, so make sure that you base your decision on everything you've been considering so far. For Section 1, we have a low-energy moment, where the music starts in the foreground, but then needs to fall back. The primary emotion we're trying to underline is apprehension, so I think a basic combination of melody, chords, and a bass line should be more than effective here. Once the dialogue comes in, we can drop the melody and switch to just chords and a bass line. Section 2 is where things start to get a bit more energetic, so I think reintroducing a segmented melody, while providing a more rhythmic identity to the chords and bass line, will work just fine, with maybe an ostinato being introduced. This pattern can then continue on into Section 3, making sure to take the dialogue at the beginning into account. Now, with all of this figured out, we can wrap up our spotting session by considering the musical form of the section. In other words, we want to look for moments where some of our core melodies or themes can be used to help tell the story. When we were discussing what the music needs to accomplish, I mentioned that I want to underline the power struggle between Danny and Miranda in this scene. For this, I think we could find great use for Miranda's theme in Section 1, when she still believes she's in charge. Once Danny appears, we can make a hint at his theme while Miranda's fades out. Section 2 can then make hints at both themes until Section 3 makes a clear statement of Danny's theme to foreshadow the inevitable outcome of the scene. And with that, we have finished spotting the scene. I recommend that you write out all your notes in a concise but detailed manner, like this. These notes will be a blueprint that you can reference while writing the music for this scene. Next week, we'll be using these notes to actually score the scene in Cubase. But for now, we've reached the end of another video in this series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found it useful, please like and subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone else that you think might enjoy it. I want to take another quick moment to thank my wonderful patrons for your support, as well as each of you who show your support of this channel through your comments, messages, and emails. I appreciate each and every one of you more than you know. So until next time, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music.